Soldiers lost in clouds. War brings with it many things: death, destruction, chaos, loss. These are all innate features of battle. War also has the tendency to draw about itself rich folklore, mysteries, and amazing stories from the battlefield. One of the most well-known and certainly more bizarre tales of wartime mystery comes from the bloody battlefields of World War I, when an entire battalion of men is said to have marched bravely into battle to fight their enemy, only to inexplicably disappear without a trace off the face of the earth. A military unit created by King Edward VII and known as the 5th Battalion Norfolk Regiment, or more commonly known as the Norfolks, vanished from the face of the earth. The disappearance took place on the Gallipoli Peninsula, part of today's Turkey. Their vanishing couldn't be supported by any logical theory, hence supernatural ones were adopted. And when it comes to the supernatural, people's minds can be very creative. The objective of the campaign was for the Allied powers of Britain and France to launch an amphibious assault against the Turks to secure the Dardanelles, which is a strait that connects the Mediterranean with the Black Sea and served as an essential sea route for their ally Russia. At the time, the strait was controlled by Turkey, an ally of Germany's. The eventual plan was to push through and forcefully claim the city of Constantinople, present-day Istanbul, which was the Ottoman Empire's capital, and expel the Turks from the war. The Norfolk Regiment was made up of 16 officers and 250 men, led by Sir Horace Proctor Beauchamp. Only 2 days after their arrival, the 5th Norfolk got an order to launch an attack against the Turks, which turned out to be a bad decision in every sense. First of all, many of the men were in poor physical condition due to seasickness, lack of sleep, and the sudden brutally high temperature and arid climate of the area. Many of them were sick with dysentery, and spirits in general were low. On top of everything, they had poor supplies, inaccurate maps, and lack of water, yet they were about to attack the Turkish fighters in broad daylight on their home terrain. As if that were not bad enough, the men were completely confused. The men instantly made a mistake and separated from the rest of the 163rd Brigade, turning in a wrong direction. Although they must have realized their mistake, the men continued to advance without reinforcement or support. They were met with a rain of machine gun fire and numerous snipers. And yet, the Norfolk Regiment managed to push the Turks back toward a forest with a storm of artillery fire. They continued into the forest, and that was the last anyone would see of them. The battalion never made it back from the forest. Not one returned to tell what happened, nor were their bodies found on the field. They simply disappeared from the face of the earth. The British Commander-in-Chief, General Sir Ian Hamilton, was just as confused as everyone else. It was very strange indeed, especially since nobody seemed to come up with a possible logical explanation. Years later, in 1965, a former sailor from New Zealand, Frederick Reichart, issued a never-before-heard testimony. He claimed to have witnessed the strange disappearance of the soldiers. His claim, supported by 3 other veterans, was that on that particular afternoon, they saw a formation of 6 or 8 loaf-shaped clouds that hovered over the area where the soldiers were fighting. One of these low-lying clouds descended even lower over the men, and after an hour or so, it rose very unobtrusively and joined the other clouds and sailed off. When the men on the ground could see the forest clearly, there was no sign of the soldiers. Even though this story was unreliable and inconsistent, people felt compelled to share it. It was also assumed at the time that the men had been captured by Turkish forces and held as prisoners of war. The British made inquiries to the Turkish government as to whether they had taken the men as prisoners, but they denied having any knowledge of the Norfolks. When the war was over, the British demanded the return of the soldiers, but again, the Turks adamantly denied having them, and indeed declared that they had never even heard of them. Whether the men were all killed in battle and their bodies not discovered, they were killed in a camp, or some other bizarre fate, the complete disappearance of the battalion is still considered a mystery.